Enjoy all your favorite sports like never before with BetMGM. Sign up using code CHAMPION and receive up to $1,500 back in bonus bets if you don't win your first bet. When you register with BetMGM, you'll get instant access to a variety of parlay selection features, live betting options, player props, and the best daily promotions in the business. And with BetMGM at your fingertips, every play and every game matter more than ever. Place your money line, prop, and parlay bets with the king of sportsbooks today. BetMGM and GameSense reminds you to play responsibly and offer resources to help you make appropriate choices. BetMGM.com for T's and C's. 21 plus to wager. Virginia only. New customer offer. All promotions are subject to qualification and eligibility requirements. Rewards issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets. Bonus bets expire 7 days from issuance. Please gamble responsibly. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Promotional offer not available in Washington, D.C.
At Bank of America, there's one question we ask our customers to learn what matters most. It's not, how much money do you have? It's not even, how much money would you like to have? No, our question isn't about money. It's about you and what you want to achieve. Because that's what's most important. So, what would you like the power to do? Bank of America. Bank of America N.A., member FDIC, Equal Credit Opportunity Lender.
You're listening to 100 Words or Less with Ray Harkins.
Hello, podcast humans. Welcome to another episode of this very show where we dedicate our lives and our audio time with people who are involved in independent music, whether it's punk, hardcore, indie rock, emo, whatever it is we're doing. And I specifically apply all of those labels as far as genres are concerned, because I do think that this band is very symbolic for all of the mixing of the styles. I am excited to have Cormac O'Sioshan. I think that's how you do it. I'm giving a little Irish lilt because he was born in Ireland, and but most people call him just Cormy. He plays in a band called Geld that released a record on Relapse earlier this year that knocked my socks off. I fell in love with the band, never heard of them before, and they have this whole sort of death and roll style, kind of like, you know, Entombed mixed with like D-beat, mixed with like Celtic Frost. Like, it's so flipping good. And anyways, I had to have Cormy on the show because he has been a dude that has been very involved, not only in the Irish punk and hardcore scene, but he moved down to Australia probably about 7 or 8 years ago, and that's where Geld comes from. And Geld has been releasing a ton of records. This is their first with Relapse, so that's kind of why it appeared on my radar. But man, he is an educated dude when it comes to the histories of punk and hardcore and like touring the States and touring Europe. Like, anyways, even if you have never heard of his band, I promise this is a very fun and insightful conversation. So I'm excited to bring it to you. I get questions all the time in my inbox, and you can email 100wordspodcast@gmail.com, where people are like, hey, how do I support the show? Like, you know, do you got a PayPal link? Can I give you a little tip? No, you don't need to do that. But what you can do for absolutely free is leave a rating and review on the Apple Podcast page. Or alternatively, if you listen on Spotify, you can leave a rating. And that takes you like maybe a minute tops for all of those activities. We're talking in summation, and it helps out the show tremendously. I know you've heard other podcasters plead with you to do that. There's a reason that we do that. It is helpful to the algorithm and the discovery and the like-minded shows you get recommended to. So I just want this thing to reach as many people that should be interested in this type of show. And yeah, that's just why I do that. So, and also I am very excited to tell you about a new release from a previous guest on the show, one of the Pattersons from Louisville, Kentucky, Photocrime. If you are unfamiliar, Photocrime is a great band, and yeah, they have a new record that's coming out on September 8th. The record's called Accelerated. It is coming this Friday. So just check out Photocrime in general. But I got approached by their label and a few people behind the scenes. And while I don't like to do repeat guests, it was one of those things where I wanted to give a specific shout out to the new Photocrime record called Accelerated, and it's out September 8th. So please stream that or buy it or whatever it is you can do to put it in your ears. Just that's very important. So let's talk to Cormy. And like I said, very interesting and insightful discussion. I was educated like almost every 5 minutes in regards to our conversation. Not only him as a person, but then, just the huge gaping hole that I personally have in regards to certain international punk and hardcore scene. So here is Cormy from Geld.
And like I said off mic, I had only recently discovered you via your signing to Relapse. And I admittedly, I hadn't even heard the name as well. And so I don't know exactly what prompted me to, press that play button, which I know is like a low bar of entry. Just the idea of like, I'll listen to a band. But I was immediately like, oh my gosh, like I felt stupid for not ever paying attention to the band. I was like, this sound is exactly what I personally like of this, really interesting combination of a lot of different styles. But the question I have just started off where it's just like, is it fun for you to obviously have people who can, interact with your music in a very easy and quick way? And then there's never any real like late to the party, so to speak, where it's like people can get into this newest LP and also be like, oh, wow, they've got like, 2 other full lengths and some other stuff going on here. Is that fun for you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's especially in this modern moment where we have so many different options of things to listen to watch, to read. It's just hard to know where to begin. And then I love finding these new bands who are, quote unquote new, and they've got like an 8 or 9 album discography, and it's like suddenly a feast in front of you to dive into, and it's really fun, having being on Relapse now, and not to be too nerdy about it, but I am a big nerd for all digital stuff, and being able to see that in the month since it's come out, more people have checked out Geld than the previous 8 years and 4 releases. So it's that is gratifying.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because as basic as that idea sounds, where it's like, working with a record label, involving someone outside of the band that, has a different platform or whatever, where it's like, oh, wow, like that whole thing actually works, plugging in with the system or whatever.
Yeah. And it is, it's not an easy decision when you've been staunchly DIY for, I've been involved in this thing for about 25 years now, from putting on gigs and doing fanzines and playing in different bands and so on, to going, okay, well, how far is too far? And in terms of, commerciality or platform. But to me, it comes back to, if you're still playing the music you want to play and you're not making any creative decisions differently for want of a bigger audience, then why not? Because the point is to have people hear your music and to have more people involved. And you think about your own entry points into the scene, many years ago, and how difficult it was to even meet people who were like-minded. And if it wasn't for, certain bands who ended up on the radio, I might not have found out about a lot of this kind of stuff, or it might have taken me a lot longer, and I would have been a lot lonelier as a teenager and so on. So it is, I've made peace with being on a bigger label, but it is an ongoing conversation with yourself that you have to check in and go, what's my motivations here? Where am I going with this? And make sure you're being honest with yourself.
Yeah, that was actually something I was going to ask later, because it does, like, the scene and the bands that you have played in, definitely. I mean, it's less so to a degree now, but, you know, I mean, whatever, in the 90s and 2000s, like the idea of, you know, having a barcode on your record and like all of those things that, you know, so many bands and fanzines really rallied against. So like you said, this was a discussion like as you were heading into working with Relapse and stuff, but was it that sort of North Star of you paying attention to, well, we're not changing who we are to be, you know, more commercially successful. So like that still feels good for us to do.
Yeah. And it's about taking everything on face value as it comes up and thinking about it. And, you know, we've always had the only rule with Geld is that there's no rules, you know, whether it comes to the sound or the image or anything. We just take every decision on its own merits because, you know, as we're all sorely aware after the past 3 years, things can change in an instant and we're all changing constantly. So you have to, you don't want to get stuck in the mud and just be an old version of yourself. I used to always find it strange how people would say, I never change, as if it's some kind of, you know, moral victory. And you go, well, it's good to keep some things the same, but other things, you're going to get left behind if you're not able to adapt and change.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point because I do. Yeah, I mean, I know I will reflexively look at myself or just the idea that, you know, whatever, being straight edge, vegan, like all of these things that, you know, people don as a label when they're in their teens and the idea of carrying it forward, like, yes, lifetime commitment, whatever, all of those things. But, you know, that's a different attachment than that idea of what you're talking about of, you know, I'm only going to listen to this style of band. Like they have to have, you know, Liberty spikes. They have to have, you know, chain belts. Like I got to have these things. Otherwise, like I'm not going to do that. And then to your point, that's when your music taste calcifies and you don't even pay attention to anything outside of that.
Yeah, exactly. And you just kind of become a parody of what you got into. And in some ways it's inevitable because the way scenes work and so society works, the people who you look up to and the people you hang out with, you tend to absorb their mindset and their perspective. And you know what, in the 90s I'm playing in bands and I was very much getting into the kind of Liberty spikes and pyramid studs and all that kind of thing. But I grew up in Ireland and we wouldn't have many bands come over, and so our bands would get offered supports with bands like Shelter or, you know, very forthrightly straight edge and positive hardcore, and we'd just be stupid drunk punks and kind of, you know, backstage and taking the piss out of them for doing warm-ups or wearing, you know, sportswear and so on. And they didn't realize that was sort of a way of saying, hey, you're okay, we want to hang out, because they came from a different background. But it's really funny to think now how that would have been, you know, roughly 20 years after the quote-unquote start of punk in 1977. And now more than that amount of time has elapsed. And all that kind of stuff doesn't really mean anything anymore. You know, there's still people, probably less, you know, more younger people who are very stuck to one particular subculture or category. But I find more and more that people who are still involved in the punk and hardcore scene in their 30s, 40s, 50s, they're much more accepting of everything, and they don't see sportswear or straight edge or something as a threat, and vice versa. There's plenty of people in the more positive side of hardcore who don't see crusties as
right
to be viewed.
Right. And I think too, to your point, the fact that this music scene has had time to mature, where now the fact that it's existed for 40, 50 years, there was no opportunity to have perspective. You know, the perspective was like 5 years ago versus now, where you can point to all of these things where it's, you know, I'm sure you feel the same when someone references like the early 2000s, you're like, that wasn't that long ago. And it's like, oh my God, no, that was like 20 years ago. That's a long time.
Yeah, it feels about 2 years ago. But then you think when you start going to gigs, and like when I first started going to shows in the 90s, and everyone was always moaning about, anyone who was over 30 was moaning about how much better it was in the 80s. And then like you read the interviews and the books and everything, and yeah, there was more people there, but it sounds fucking horrible. just the alcoholism, the drug abuse, the violence, the bullying, and the misogyny. And it's not better. It's just you were younger and it was new.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, everyone is going to view their era as the most important, or alternatively, or maybe not even alternatively, but like view things through rose-colored glasses, where it's like, oh man, I survived that riot. And it's like, well, someone might not have. Like, that's probably a bad vibe for those people. So yeah, you're very right. Well, we'll dig into more of that a little bit later. But I know, like you mentioned, and your beautiful Irish lilt, clearly, obviously not from Australia, but the band resides there. I know that you have had a very unconventional and wild background as far as your family is concerned, and where you spent time, and you moved around a lot in Ireland. But I'm guessing, because you grew up there, like, do you feel that Ireland, generally speaking, is your home base for all intent and purposes?
That's a funny question, because actually when we went to Europe with Geld in 2019, I can't remember where we were playing, but someone asked me where I was from, and I said Melbourne, and then I said, no, actually I'm from Dublin, hang on. And I've been living here 13 years now. But as as you mentioned, we moved around a lot when I was a kid, and I realised that this year is the longest. Melbourne is now the longest I've ever lived in any one place. I've got 3 kids; they're all born here. My home is here. Everything I do is here. My business is here. So I think Melbourne and Australia is my home now, and I do miss Ireland a lot. But Ireland today is a very different place to when I was growing up as well.
Sure.
Again, same as everywhere, but yeah, Australia and Melbourne is my home now.
Got it. And your the different moves that you were making, because I think I'm going to speak from a very North American perspective. People have a very limited touch point for Europe in general, and let alone, smaller countries like, Ireland and, even the UK. Most people, have no concept, where it's like, do they even use the same currency or whatever? And I'm guessing, because they're obviously the, divide between the, North and South Ireland, your experience growing up was moving all over the island. So what was your, your experience in growing up over there, and the different perspectives you were offered on what was happening within your own home country?
So a lot of these things, you think about them only in the rearview mirror. At the time, you're just living your life. It's only when you look backwards that you think, actually, most people didn't grow up in a country where there was literally a war happening a few hours away. But to be honest, it didn't seem all that serious to us when we were kids. People would, my parents would be very shocked by it, and there'd be bombings and shootings. But it seldom happened around where we were living. And, we'd drive up to Northern Ireland, and one half of my family is very staunchly Irish Republican, in favour of Irish freedom. And the other half is still getting pensions from the British Army from joining them. So, some family gatherings wouldn't happen that often. But we'd be going through the border checkpoints, and there's soldiers pointing guns at you, and, armoured personnel carriers with like big machine guns on the top, tracking your car. And I just thought it was cool because I was 8, and guns are cool when you're 8.
Yep. Right.
And but my granny would be screaming out the window, "You fucking British bastards," all this shit at the soldiers. And to me, it was just like a movie or a cartoon. It didn't really make sense. And it was only when I was much older that I started to develop a perspective on it, because as anyone from anywhere who's tried to understand it knows, it's extremely complex, and there's no simple answers to it. But that was not really a major aspect of most people's lives in Ireland, unless you actually lived in the areas where a lot of conflict was going on. And it was very interesting when, around the age of 17, 18, when we were playing in bands and started making connections with people in other cities, we'd start going up to Belfast for shows. And there was this legendary autonomous centre there called the War Zone Centre. And they'd have a festival every year. in the late 90s and early 2000s. And that was where I met a lot of people, heard a lot of new bands and new styles of music for the first time. But something that always struck me was, again, when I got older, I'd talk to Australian friends or American friends who had come over to Ireland and they visited Belfast, and they had the time of their lives. Everyone was so friendly, so welcoming. They just had the best time. But a lot of the time when we went up from the Republic of Ireland, there would be quite a hard vibe where they were like, you fuckers coming up from Dublin, you think you're so cool and you know so much more than us. And we'd be like, why is everyone here so aggro all the time? And obviously that's a lot to do with the circumstances you grew up in. But that was the first time I started really noticing that there was a different mindset amongst people from Northern Ireland versus people from Southern Ireland.
Right. And it's so, I mean, people, especially in North America, it's like such a difficult concept to wrap your head around, even though there's distinct differences between, California versus like Florida or whatever. But just the notion that you could, be existing in such a small geographical area and have these huge divides, like, that's just it'd be like, Southern California fighting against like Los Angeles County, where it's just like, what? Like, that's such a weird thing to be able to grow up in and around.
Yeah, I guess so. And again, it's a matter of perspective. Where in Ireland there's fierce rivalry, and I suppose it's the same in the US. There's fierce rivalry from one town to the next, whether it's sports or school or anything. You're like, those fuckers from wherever, don't trust them. They're sneaky or they're dumb or whatever. And I think a lot of it is just tribalism. Humans are going to do that.
I am thrilled to tell you about our friends at rockabilia.com. They are a great purveyor of band merch of all shapes and sizes. And before you go to rockabilia.com, you must use the promo code 100 words or less. That gets you 10% off your entire order. How about entire? Let's hit that E. But they are based in the Midwest here in the United States. They ship stuff out to you lickety split, and they have so much stuff. Like, I don't care if you're into, Coldplay, Bring Me the Horizon, Aerosmith, AC/DC, whatever it is, they have it. And it's all officially licensed merch. So that means the bands get paid. It's none of this bootleg stuff or horrible quality stuff that you find on Amazon when you're just like poking around. Don't buy band merch off Amazon. I'll put that out there. Like, that is a thing that no one needs to do. So go to rockabilia.com, use the promo code 100 words or less. It gets you 10% off of your entire order, and have fun shopping. So thank you very much, Rockabilia.
Can you believe we've had 7 months without an NFL game? Crazy, right? Well, good thing that's over. NFL is here, and DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, is giving you a can't-miss offer for Week 1. This week, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5 on any NFL game. DraftKings is hooking everyone up with game day greatness. All customers can take advantage of 2 new offers every single game day this September. Check the app to see what you get. Download now and use code 100words to sign up. New customers can take home $200 in bonus bets instantly just for betting $5. That's code 100words. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, Kansas. 21 plus. Age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. See dkng.co/football for eligibility, terms, and responsible gaming resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply.
But yeah, as what you were saying in regards to the tribalism and just even having those distinct differences between towns and, rival high schools. And it is, to your point, human nature, and it bleeds into everything we do. Even, like we were talking about earlier, like the scenes, and here's the, old school hardcore kids versus the, metalheads or, crust punks or whatever. It's like, we always have these divisions.
Yeah. And it seems that people define themselves often by what they're not. And you sort of need something else to be there to go, okay, well, if I'm not that, what am I? And that's obviously can be quite problematic because it becomes aggressive or combative in some contexts. But it doesn't need to be like that. And the really interesting thing about punk in Ireland is that in Northern Ireland and in Belfast, it was the first place that Catholics and Protestants met on an even keel. Was everything there, where you drink, where you shop. It's all about your sectarian background and even your name. You know, if someone's John Smith, well, we know he's a Protestant. If someone's Paddy Riley, we know he's a Catholic. And so people in punk, you know, like everywhere, would just adopt their own nickname. They would reject their surname, which would have a national characteristic to it. And that was pretty interesting, you know, as I got more and more obsessed with punk and hardcore and reading the history of it and going, oh, okay, these cross-sectarian lines that were crossed for the first time in the 70s by punk, and it continued. And that's, something that it feels a little bit presumptuous to say I have pride in it, but it is a scene that I've dedicated a lot of my life and my time to. So, yeah, I am proud to think that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason that I'm fascinated by that idea of identity is because I know it's one that you have done not only a lot of soul searching and research and, you know, being able to connect a lot of these things about either your own family history or, like you said, becoming obsessed with, you know, punk and hardcore and tracing those lines back to, you know, when they originated. Where does that kind of come from in your head? Is it just a matter of like you enjoy kind of the history of, you know, all things, or is that just, you know, who you are?
I've never really thought about it, to be honest. And I think probably a lot of it is because of my own family background. And I'm not sure how well it's known. Some people do know about these things, the Magdalen laundries and the different kind of workhouses or prisons for women that existed in Ireland up to the 90s. And so basically Ireland was a theocracy from the 1920s. After independence from the British, the Catholic Church got their claws into the country, and basically there was no separation between church and state. And there was generations and generations of women who were abandoned by society to the Catholics and locked away in homes for the crime of being pregnant without being married. And obviously, you know, they did this on their own because no men were ever held culpable for this. But the women were locked away in these different homes. And my father was born in one of those, which was called Bessborough. And it was notorious. It had a higher infant mortality rate than the German concentration camps in the 40s, Dachau and Auschwitz, and so on. And the nuns and the priests and the government all colluded to hide this information for years. And so I think in a lot of ways, I always wondered who I was and where I came from. And there's a lot of fear there, a lot of paranoia, where, to be honest, I was worried that my grandfather was a coward or that my grandmother had been a victim of abuse. And that's why she had been rejected and had gone away. But actually, we found out the truth in 2019 because of a DNA test. You know, those Ancestry.com type things.
Yep. And
so my dad did one of those and found out he had a distant relative in Brisbane in Australia. And the social worker from Ancestry.com made the connection and said, would you like to be put in touch? Yes, I would. Would you? Yes, I would. And it turned out he had 4 younger sisters with both of the same parents who they all stayed together. And so obviously that was a bitter pill for him to swallow and for all of us, knowing that we had this whole family and that my granny died only a few years before that. And we never got to find her and meet her. And actually my one auntie died just last week, who I hadn't met. I'd met the other 3 when I went back to Ireland last year. And so those kind of things, they do haunt you to a certain degree because, as I got older and started getting interested in, I've always been interested in history, but interested in, your own family history and where you come from, I can find out quite a lot on my mum's side, but nothing on my dad's side. And the stuff I could find out on my mum's side was really, really interesting to me, because I found out there was a lot of people who were soldiers, a lot of people who were educators, a lot of people who were healers, and all these different things, a lot of musicians, and all these different things that I've always been fascinated with, and I didn't know where they came from. I was able to find out these have been in my family for hundreds of years. And it makes me very curious about what's on the other side. And so that's an ongoing conversation, but I think that's probably where a lot of that came from, that curiosity and wanting to know the reason behind the reason and what's going on under the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, especially once you start to find those bits of information and once you scratch that itch, like there's no way that you can just be like, no, I think I'm fine. I don't need to know anymore. It's like, are you kidding me? Like there's so much more underneath there.
Yeah. And well, I think, for someone like yourself who's a journalist and an interviewer and is obviously very interested in, the story behind the story, that's natural. But it turns out most people don't want to know that. And there are so many sad stories, because I joined various Facebook groups for survivors from these homes and so on to try and get more information and understanding. And just the stories are horrific. The rejection, people who find their birth mother and it's just too chaotic for their present life to acknowledge their son or daughter and all those things. So unfortunately, a lot of people do prefer to lock these things at the back of the closet and never revisit them again. And who am I to judge that? They're just trying to live a life and survive. But
yeah,
that's not me. I want to know.
Right.
Even if it means peering into the void, I want to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm going to guess, like, when you started to get into, subculture and be introduced to these things that, like you said, the radio was very informative for you finding out about music and stuff like that. It seems to me that you dove in headfirst, not only, maybe musically, but you immediately were getting into the aesthetics and obviously the presentation of whatever it is at that particular time, whether it's dyeing your hair or, all that sort of stuff that parents probably hate. Or were your parents being like, oh, what is Cormy getting into? How did they react to you getting involved with this?
I guess it depends. They were, same as most people's parents. They were kind of, would like take the mickey out of me a bit, kind of going, what my dad used to call it, screech arse music.
I like it.
And I was equally into like punk and metal and hardcore. As I started hearing them, it would have first of all been stuff like Green Day and Nirvana on the radio, or Faith No More and bands like that. And then I was into really heavy stuff like Fear Factory and bands like that before I started getting more into more melodic hardcore and stuff like that. So I think my parents were psyched when I started listening to, I don't know, Fat Wreck and Epitaph type bands, because it wasn't as awful. But at the same time, as I got more into it, they started getting a bit more worried about it. A funny story comes to mind, actually. It's a bit of a horror story. When I would have been 17 or 18, and we had a band, a pop punk band at the time, and we were trying to sound like, I don't know, No Effects and bands like that. But because we were very inept, it came out sounding like the Outcasts or Rudy or, Maximum Rock and Roll reviewed our 7-inch and said we were an oi band and sounded like Reducers, SF and things like that.
You're like, that's not what we're going for.
Yeah, that's not what we're going for, but it gets us way more credibility. So sure, people are like buying the record now, so that's good. But
right.
We knew the guys in a band called Runnin' Riot from Belfast. Sadly, the singer Colin died a few years ago. He was a legendary Belfast skinhead. They were a great band, and we got the chance. It was right before Christmas. We got the chance to play a couple of gigs with them, one in Dublin and one in Belfast. And we lived in in Roscommon, a small countryside town. So that was a huge deal. We maybe would have played once or twice before in Dublin, which would have been a major aspiration at that stage. And so we went up, and my granny lived about an hour away in a town called Laytown in Meath. And my parents were there, and my sister was also into punk, and she was allowed to go to the gig. And then my dad was going to pick her up afterwards and bring her back to my granny's house with her friends. And then we were going to stay at some punk house and then get the bus up to Belfast to play the next day. And in Ireland, Christmas is a big time for drinking. Most cynics will say every time's a big time for drinking in Ireland, but Christmas is an especially big time. And so we were very much aware that we had to get all our Christmas drinking done in a couple of nights, because I would be at my granny's house and unable to indulge, because we were underage, I think. Yeah, we would have been underage. So what we did was we bought a bottle of vodka, consumed it very quickly at the pub. What was the pub? The Temple on Dorset Street in Dublin. Blacked out, and I pieced all this together the next day. I fell over on top of a table of skinheads, knocked over, 8 pints of Guinness. Half of them want to fight me. Half of them are like, no, it's Cormy. He's okay. I know him. The bouncers kicked me out. I'm trying to go back in to get my guitar. My dad arrives at this time, and I'm trying to get back into the pub. My guitar's there beside the door, but I still think it's inside and want to play. He has to go in and ask my friends, what's going on? Are they okay? Meanwhile, this legendary punk from Dublin, Deco, who played in Strike 9 DC and Paranoid Visions, starts having a fight with another old punk on the street. Traffic is stopped. They're beating the shite out of each other. And then someone falls. The drummer in our band, Owen, falls out the door, gets sick on my dad's shoes. And then someone hands him a flyer, which is steal your Christmas presents. And it describes in detail how to shoplift for beginners and steal your Christmas presents to resist capitalism. And so I woke up the next morning in my granny's house near the seaside, and wearing one sock and otherwise naked, and I think I probably weed in the bed or something, and could hear the sea outside. It was like, where am I? And everyone is just deathly silent and ashamed. And that evening, my dad had a talk with me. What are you doing with your life?
Yeah, that's definitely an extreme version of just the talk of your parents, starting to see you get into something weird. But then how far that evening transpired, where it's like, okay, we gotta sit down with Cormy, because this is none of this is cool.
Yeah. And Exhibit A, the flyer. Exhibit B, the vomit on my shoes. I'm like, oh Jesus, okay.
Totally. It's like one thing after another. Like nothing broke right for you that evening. So now you have to, sit here and have an awkward conversation with your father about being like, you need to take yourself seriously, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
And I guess that was all a part of it. Just figuring things out. And I think eventually they accepted and, reluctantly accepted that this was just me. And that's the way I was going to be, not the drunkenness and the tomfoolery, but the dedication to a life around music and that whole underground scene, and that it wasn't about a job or money or a career. It was just about the passion and the love for it.
Yeah. And so when you started to go to shows and everything like that, did you immediately want to play in a band? I mean, it sounds like you did when you were, pretty young and wanting to rip off all the, Fat and Epitaph bands and stuff. So did you immediately get captured by the idea of playing in a band?
Yeah, even before that. I remember I tried to learn guitar a couple times before I was able to. And I was in a boarding school for a couple of years when I was a teenager, and one of the upsides of that was they had a good music teacher and good music lessons, and that's when I learned properly. But even before that, I'd been getting into different bands, and I remember seeing the video for Smashing Pumpkins 1979 on telly, and just thinking, wow, that looks like so much fun. I want to be in a band. just the house party bit and them just going around being idiots. And that was very much our vibe. You know, we didn't have cars or house parties or anything like that, but we lived in a very boring town where there was nothing to do. And maybe it was unconscious or something, but I wasn't saying, you know, this is a way out. But I think I was looking for an escape from the mundane normality of everything. And music was always that. From when I first started hearing music. And I think it was probably when I was 10. Yeah, my 10th birthday, I got a Walkman and 2 tapes. And I got Guns N' Roses, Use Your Illusion 2, and Genesis, The Way We Walk. And I much preferred Genesis, to be honest. And from then on, I was never not with headphones on. I just constantly listening to music, you know, waiting at the radio when there were singles out that I liked. With the tape deck paused as soon as the song comes on pause it, make your own mixtapes. And then and I think that's how it was stuff. That was how I first heard hardcore, actually, because of I was big into Beastie Boys around the Ill Communications album and the singles Sabotage and Sure Shot. And you couldn't find the CD single of them, so I ended up buying the tape of Ill Communications for you know, birthday or Christmas present. And then I think we got a CD player at home, which was, you know, a big deal. And I found the Some Old Bullshit CD collection and bought that with some birthday money because it was on special. And then I didn't even know, you know, all those songs like Egg Raid on Mojo and the early 7 inches they had. And I didn't know it was hardcore. I didn't know what it was. It sounded ugly. You know, the minor chord progressions and stuff. But something made me keep listening to it back and back. And as soon as I found out that, you know, these were underground gigs you could go to, I was immediately like, I have to be involved in this. And that's kind of everything. You know, I have a lot of wide ranging interests. And as soon as I find something interesting, I need to find out everything about it. And within a few weeks or a month, I'll be like, okay, I want to progress this thing, or else that's enough of it for me. But when I'm in, I'm all in. And that's kind of what happened. It was like, well, of course I'm going to do this. And, you know, like you've played in bands. Those first couple of weeks or months even, you know, when you're very inept in a rehearsal space, you finally manage to convince some friends to also pick up a bass or a guitar or a drum kit. And just those feelings when you manage to struggle through a cover song, you know, a Misfits song or a Rancid song or whatever, you're like, wow, we're a band. We did it. And
totally,
that feeling is it can't be matched. You know, that feeling of creating something musical with other people. I still absolutely adore it. Can't get enough of it.
Yeah. And did you, like you said, the pursuit of music, you know, from a career perspective was not ever in the cards. Like that wasn't why you did what you did. Was the, you know, pursuit of a education, like did you care about school from that perspective, or was that, you know, just put in the back burner because of your obsession with music?
No, I never cared about school at all. But my parents very much cared about school and education. And I was kicked out of a few schools and wanted to quit high school and just move to Dublin and just do music and get a job. Just to be able to do music, and they just basically wouldn't allow it and put a lot of pressure on me, which I resented them for a long time, and now which I really appreciate, because I thought I was stupid because I just didn't fit in school. It didn't make sense to me. If something interested me, I was very much able to learn it, and if it didn't, or if I felt disrespected, I found it very hard to get along with that. But I guess they were from very poor families who made it into quite a comfortable middle-class lifestyle from education. My dad was the only one from his family, his adopted family, for a very long time to finish high school until the 90s. And he, even to go to high school, you had to get, what you call it, when the school pays for you to do it, a scholarship.
Scholarship, yep.
Yeah, so he had very conflicted feelings about, you know, the Christian Brothers and different religious orders, because they encouraged him a lot to pursue learning and academia. And, he got a scholarship to university, and both of my parents would have been going to New York and the United States in summers in between university to make the money for the next year, working as janitors and waitresses and so on. And so they had a very staunch attitude on, you can do whatever you want, but you're getting your education. And that included university, where, as soon as I was finished high school, struggled through to the end, made it out, was able to move to Dublin and get some freedom. And obviously, all I'm doing is going to gigs, playing in bands, doing music and fanzines, and completely neglecting university. I was studying English, psychology, and sociology, I think, and failed the first year spectacularly, didn't study for exams or anything, and then had to work all summer to make the money to repeat. And then I did it properly. I decided I wanted to do it. And so, I got a degree and a master's degree in English. And that proved to be very useful, not for the knowledge, but for the discipline of knowing how to learn effectively and learning how to do that.
Oh, it's time for you to be made aware of our friends at evilgreed.net. They are an amazing web store solution provider to record labels and bands. But the thing about them is they don't bust their doors wide open to every single band and record label. They act as a curator, as it were, where it's like, if you are into artistic/heavy stuff, that is what they do. And they have focused their sights on that. But before you have just a tremendous amount of fun shopping on their website, use this promo code 100 words. That's the number 100 words. That will give you 10% off your entire order. The company's based in Berlin, Germany, but they ship worldwide. And honestly, the shipping rates to the United States right now are very advantageous. So use that. And I personally have ordered from them before, got my order in like around a week. It's incredible. They are top notch at their shipping and customer service. But just to give you an idea of the sort of bands that they work with, maybe you're into, some Long Island hardcore. How about Pain of Truth? Or maybe you're really into sort of avant-garde death metal. How about Blood Incantation, Soul Glow, Tsunami, Bell Witch? They also work with labels like Sargent House, Triple B, Death Wish. They do it all. And I love them for it. So if you are into artistic heavy stuff and want to buy merch, vinyl, all the stuff that they can ship directly to your door, that is where evilgreed.net comes in, and that is where the promo code 100 words will get you 10% off your entire order. Thank you very much for your support, Evil Greed, and have fun shopping. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. You know those moments in your life where you reach a fork in the road and you're being like, left, right, I don't know. Left is like, palm trees. Right is like forest. They both look like good ideas, but who do I turn to? Do I talk to friends, family? And sometimes you need a third party to be able to help you walk through these monumental decisions in your life. And that is where therapy comes into play. I'm a huge advocate for therapy, and it is a very beneficial thing to me, and I know many of my friends. And that is why I love working with BetterHelp. If you're thinking about giving therapy a try, start here. BetterHelp is amazing because it's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and most importantly, suitable to your schedule. All you do is pop onto their website, fill out a brief questionnaire, and then you get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists if the vibe isn't right, and at no additional charge. All of this stuff is incredible. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. So visit betterhelp.com/Ray today to get 10% off your first month. That is a great deal. And I know that I'm saying that because it's an advertisement, but straight up an awesome deal. That's betterhelp.com/Ray and get therapy. It is an amazing thing to get for yourself. So betterhelp.com/Ray for 10% off your first month. When you have the idea of pursuing, just playing in a band, but there's no aspiration to make a living of it, of course you're going to, pursue the normal things that people do in their lives, but then you're going to have this abnormal thing that you do, quote unquote, on the side, even though it consumes, 95% of your headspace,
Yeah. And it was always sort of the reverse, like the opposite way around, that I tried to find jobs and career paths that would service my desire to play music and my desire to tour and to be able to rehearse regularly and not be beholden to a career that wouldn't allow me to leave. And that was actually, I moved to Denmark when I was 22 because I discovered as part of my university degree, there was an extra, you could make it an international degree by doing this program. There used to be the EU, the European Union, facilitated it, I think, called Erasmus, which meant you could go and study in another country. And I only discovered this towards the end of my second year in university. And all the places had been taken for everywhere in Europe. And I had traveled around Europe the previous summer, just the gutters of Europe, gone to punk festivals and things. I think it was with money I'd gotten as a birthday present for my 21st birthday. And I'd been to Copenhagen and at the K-Town festival there. It was the second one, I think, first or second one. And I just thought the city was amazing. And just by chance, nobody wanted to go to Copenhagen because the person who'd gone there on Erasmus the previous year had a terrible time because the university weren't very involved in the program, helping the international students. And because you're studying English, and English is a second language there, even though everyone's very good at it, that meant that instead of studying with the undergraduate students, I'd be studying with the master's students. And I'd only have 4 contact hours a week and, another 30 or 40 hours reading, which suited me down to the ground because it just meant that I could be fully involved in the punk scene there. And a lot of the attraction was that nobody in Ireland was very interested in dedicating their whole life, trying to tour. It was always me going, why is no one turning up for rehearsal? Why aren't we just, putting more into this? And I went over there and everyone was like, this is my life. I'm 110% into it. And I was like, yeah, this is the place for me. And so that was what facilitated that. And then when I spent a couple of years there, I did want to finish my degree. So I went back to Ireland to do that and got a scholarship for a master's. But all the time, as soon as it was Christmas holidays, summer holidays, I was straight over to Denmark, rehearsing, recording, touring, and kept the band going long distance like that. So I got quite used to finding ways to make it work. And during, I think, the final year of my degree, I started writing freelance for music magazines and getting a little bit of money that way. And that started being a path because, I never needed much money other than for music gear and traveling. That's all I've really wanted it for. So I was able to survive on not that much money and still have, a music career, so to speak, even if it wasn't about money or success or anything like that.
Yeah. So was that your first time really being able to tour internationally? Because I know you've been to the US obviously a couple of times, but was that your first experience when you started playing bands over there?
Yeah. I'd never really been outside Ireland before. We tried to organize tours, but it was just so hard and so expensive, and we were young and inexperienced. So when we went over there, the whole crew around Ungdomshus at the youth house and the people I became friends with started a band called Nuclear Death Terror with some people who'd been in a band called Uro, who I really loved from Denmark. They were kind of anarcho-punk, but had like a cello in it and were something a bit extra. And they were very experienced because it's so much easier to tour on mainland Europe. There's a huge network of autonomous houses and squats and bars and pubs and just unlike anything in Ireland. So within, a month of our first gig, we were going on tour. Actually, it was a friend's band broke up right before their tour and they were like, do you want to have our tour? It's all booked. We were like, yeah, okay. So we just left and went on tour in a half broken down van in Germany for a week. And then it was like, okay, let's just do this until we can't do it anymore.
Right. I just love that idea. Do you want to take the tour that we have booked? Sure. Yeah. I mean, no one knows who we are, but it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. And, you hustle to get your demo tape ready. And we didn't even have a demo tape. I think we only had T-shirts. We just like screen print some crappy T-shirts, and yeah, it was all awesome.
I love that.
Then I think off the back of that, we booked our own like longer tour for maybe 3 weeks, 2 or 3 months later.
Yeah.
And then that was the beginning of just constantly trying to tour. And we did a lot around Europe, Eastern Europe, Scandinavia, went to Mexico and Southeast Asia, Japan, Australia. We went all over the place. That's how I ended up moving to Australia, actually. With that band, we toured here. And that was, when I stayed here afterwards.
With Geld, like what attracted me to it is the fact that and I know every band likes to describe their sound as eclectic and, we're pulling all these different styles, but it's like, you really do. It's like, you got some D-beat in there, you got some, street punk, and then you have, metal like, Celtic Frost or Hellhammer, that sort of stuff. And you do combine it all together. I mean, I think very successfully, especially with the new record. Like you can hear elements of it in your previous ones. To me, it seems like, where you're probably at in your musical life, this is kind of like your ideal band to play in because it is merging all of these things you've probably been interested in for the better part of 15, 20 years.
Yeah, I guess so. And thanks for the kind words. It's cool to hear that you can hear all that in it, because I guess it was never really the intention to have this band that blends a lot of things. We just wanted to be a Die Kreuzen worship band. And this was a side band for us. We all had other bands that were our main thing at the time. I was in Chromosome, and Al and Tom had a band called Gentlemen they were doing, and we're also doing other bands. And Isaac, who was our original bass player, was in a bunch of bands, Soma Coma and Power. And this was just a little side project. It took us years to even play a first gig or record a demo, but we just were having so much fun with it. And I think it was more about the attitude of everyone rather than an intention to try and blend everything. Because a lot of the time, and you'll probably have experienced this yourself, when you play in bands with people, necessarily like there's a lot of passion behind what you want to do, and people have different ideas about the way the band is going to go. And in my experience, most of the bands that do a lot have at least 2 members who are very passionate about what you want to do. And often there's bands where there's other people who are just happy to be there. They don't care that much, and you can go for a while, but there isn't enough creative tension to really push things beyond the boundaries of your potential. And that means there's a lot of potential for conflict, because people are putting in a lot of work and they have a very clear idea on what they want it to be and what they don't want it to be. And the difference with this band is that everyone was pretty open to, we'll try anything, we'll just see what happens. And just slowly and organically, it all started coming in like that. Even I was kind of trying to find old pictures and files recently and discovered, rehearsal tapes and a demo we made in 2015. And it's the same songs, but there's no distortion on the guitar. It's basically just clean, almost garage rock sounding. There's no effects or anything. And you can hear like the sort of seeds of the sound, but it's very different to how it is now. And that just came from a natural urge to explore and try things. And everyone in the band has extremely wide musical taste. So I think it's like, there's a lot of bands in the 90s. Like the 90s were shat on for years unfairly, I think, because there's so many cool bands then. But there were also a lot of bands trying to blend things in ways that just didn't really work. And so you're always very conscious of not creating some kind of terrible, embarrassing mutant monstrosity. But and I think that's why a lot of people, for 20 years, maybe from the late 90s up to the late teens, were doing a lot of genre bands that were cool, but were often a bit hackneyed after 2 or 3 records. You're like, we don't need another record of the same thing again. And it is really fun now to be able to blend all those influences and have people hear them. And I think a lot of that is because we as a scene and as a community are much more highly educated in terms of our history and our music and the development of it all.
Not only when you get older, you have a little more skill in playing your instrument, but then all of this stuff that you have soaked in musically, it just starts to come out whether you intend it to or not.
Yeah. And I think at the same time, you've become more mature as a person. So you're much more able to negotiate those kind of creative differences and find a path between them instead of just going, no, it's got to be like this, or else I'm not playing, and just turning your back. And I think that is a general maturity of it as a musical scene where, and I used to have a problem with this, where, you could, in an afternoon nowadays with the internet, you can learn the entire history of, Youth Crew 88 or, early 90s crust from New York or whatever. But now, post-pandemic, I think because the fashion parade died down a bit, because people had some time at home alone to really think about what they wanted to do, I feel a lot of people educated themselves to a much deeper level about musical history. And it's really, really inspiring to me because you're seeing kids in their teens and early 20s being very adept, not necessarily at their instruments and skill-wise, but music-wise, and having a vision of what they want to do and adhering to that, but also doing new things. This is pretty new, It's I think this is a golden age right now for music, and it's very inspiring to me because there is a tendency in underground music to always look backwards with rose-tinted glasses. And now I think there's a lot more people looking forwards and a lot more things kind of coming together in a really cool way.
Yeah, I agree. The idea of, like you were talking about earlier, working with Relapse and being able to expose yourself and the band to a wider audience. I do think that, bands from Australia, broadly speaking, like it's really difficult to, get a audience here in North America in the same way that, maybe bands over in the UK or other places might have a little bit easier time. Do you, what do you attribute that to? Do you think it's just a matter of like, well, Australia is farther away geographically speaking to North America? But what do you kind of noticed in regards to that?
Yeah, it's a fair point. And I think partially it is just geography and being so far away, and it's a long way to go anywhere. But also there is a kind of double-edged sword to the Australian outlook culturally and socially, which is very much self-contained. And you might have heard before, there's a phrase here for people from England called POMs, prisoners of Mother England.
Sure.
Which relates to the kind of love-hate relationship between Australia and the United Kingdom, where this was a colony of the UK in terms of, the modern history of it. And it was very much looking to the old country for its cues. And that changed a lot after the Second World War. There was a lot of immigration from Southern Europe and the Mediterranean and Middle East and lots of different places. But what you end up with is a very staunch view that we don't care about anything that happens anywhere else. We're fine here and we're doing our own thing. And another part of this is something called tall poppy syndrome, where anyone who's a tall poppy gets cut down. We're all the same. Don't think you're special. Just shut up and have a beer. And in a way, this can be cool because it means that there's a very self-contained music scene. And like Melbourne's huge. It's like 5 million people here. There's hundreds of bands. There's loads of amazing bands that nobody ever hears, even outside of Melbourne, never mind outside of Australia. But the other side of it is that sometimes Australian bands can suffer from a lack of confidence in terms of realizing how good they are and making the effort to get overseas. And a lot of that, I guess, comes back to opportunities, whether it's money or network or contacts. And it is funny because I think, it would have been when I was living in Denmark and touring and playing a lot there, we would have seen a couple of Australian bands, Piss Christ and Straitjacket Nation would have been the only ones who would have been touring that I can remember. And it was Jaap from Piss Christ who I started doing Chromosome with. And he's such a motivated individual in terms of just making things happen. He works really, really hard. Plus, he's a sick frontman. And that was the kind of thing where I think Piss Christ were the first Australian band, other than, Parkway Drive and huge bands, that a lot of people in the underground scene heard. And a lot of that was about the performance. Yep. And they toured relentlessly. And Timmy from Piss Christ ended up joining Nuclear Death's Terror and moving to Denmark and everything. And then I think in a lot of ways, Piss Christ opened the doors for people to say, you can do this. It is possible. And there has been more bands going out and doing that now. But again, same as everyone, since the pandemic, it's harder than ever. Just the cost of everything. Also, I guess with modern surveillance society, it's much harder to do things under the radar, visas, things like that, which are prohibitively expensive. So yeah, it is tough for Australian bands to be heard and to get out, and especially when there's loads of bands constantly touring and playing. If you're in the US, you can hop in a van and tour for 6 weeks. Here, it's 10 hours between each city, and there's only 4-5 cities you could play. So,
right,
it's not a viable lifestyle.
Right. Yeah. You gotta fly in between gigs, which, most people that travel around the US where you're just like, what do you mean you're flying? It's like, well, yeah, it's either a 10-hour drive that is not a direct straight line, or you have to fly in order to actually make it to the gig.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you started to, obviously like play shows and ingratiate yourself within, the Australian punk and hardcore scene, how would you, I guess, kind of compare it to other scenes that you have been a part of? Like, what kind of makes it either different or unique or special?
Well, I mean, I'll give a pretty Melbourne-centric answer since this is where I live. But one thing that Melbourne has going for it that most of the other Australian cities don't have is venues, places to play. And most people in most cities will have experienced this. There is the tradition of basement shows and house shows in the US, which is cool. But that isn't really a thing that happens in Europe or Australia. And in Sydney, for example, it's definitely better now, but it used to be way harder. Or in Brisbane or in Adelaide, you would be lucky to have one venue in the whole city that will, reluctantly tolerate punk and hardcore and metal shows. Whereas in Melbourne, there's at least a dozen venues that you can book, whether it's an 80-person show or an 800-person show. And it's not that hard. It's not that a big deal. Which, when you're involved in DIY gigs and promotion, it's sort of trial by fire. You fuck up a few times. It's really embarrassing. You're not able to pay the band who came from the other city, and there was only 3 people there, and whatever, just kid stuff, 20-year-old stuff. But here I feel it's a lot easier to get things moving. And that's the flip side of, it's very hard to get out of your city and to get out of your country and go overseas. But within your city, there's lots of opportunities to be a band and to do a lot of things. And I think that's very encouraging, because you'll see younger bands and younger people get going and be able to build up some momentum quite quickly. And that is really encouraging here. In terms of the actual gigs themselves, it's much the same. It's much the same as in Europe or in America or Japan or anywhere else that I've toured around. People are friendly. People are very happy to see overseas bands because it's so far away. You don't get many, and people are very friendly and welcoming. And I think that's why bands from overseas love coming here as well, because it is a really fun and open scene.
Yeah. And to your point, it's an event, when bands make that intention to come down there, people do treat it accordingly, where it's like, oh yeah, this is maybe the only time the band's ever going to be able to make it over here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Two last things I wanted to hit on was the idea that I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but like your day job in general is do you work in the cannabis industry, or have you worked in the cannabis industry, or am I just misreading your internet presence?
I used to own a cannabis company, which I sold. So I own and run a small marketing communications agency called Purpose Communications.
Okay.
Yeah, so that led to having a 20% stake in this company that I did with a couple of other guys. And I sold it. I sold my stake in it a few years ago.
Got it.
Because it blew up quickly. And I still have various clients in the cannabis industry. But I mostly have clients from, not necessarily sustainability, but, social good, I suppose you would say. People working towards a better world rather than just working for money. And I also have clients who are just working for money, and that's fine too, because, we all need to pay the bills. But I worked as a music journalist for years. The money is absolutely terrible. So then I started realizing I was working in a chocolate factory, for a company that was growing quite fast, and they had nobody doing marketing for them. So I said, can I do an email newsletter? Can I do your Facebook? And then that grew really fast, and turned out I was good at it. So that's how I ended up doing marketing stuff. It's just kind of the easiest way I could get decent money without destroying my body doing hard manual labor.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, the reason I ask that is because, you clearly have taken a lot of the DIY principles that you've learned playing in bands over the years and applied it to your, professional life. I'm guessing the connection between those two is obvious for you, but maybe other people that don't have experience with that probably are like, oh, Cormy, you play in a band? Like what, how does your real life interact with your band life?
It's pretty funny. One of my clients at the moment are a motorbike touring company. They bring people over to South America or Russia or whatever, and they tour around for weeks or months on motorbikes. And they thought it was really fun that I was in a band. And I sent them the video we did for the first single on Relapse, Fog of War, because it's got all motorbikes and trucks in it, and they're big into motorbikes and trucks. And I wasn't sure what response it would get, because they think, you're going to sound like AC/DC or Cold Chisel or something. And then they hear that. It's very different to, the marketing meetings presentation. So, but they're stoked on it. Like, they actually want to now feature their trucks and bikes in future music videos. And they're all guys in their 50s and 60s. And it's fun doing that. But it is really interesting, actually, that you hit on that point, which nobody's brought up before, but which I've always thought, of having that DIY mindset when you've grown up in punk and you figure out, how to make things happen on the smell of an oily rag. When you apply that to your work and your, the professional world, you're able to get $20,000 results for $2,000, because you're used to not spending money frivolously and to doing, quote unquote, guerrilla marketing, where basically you're just trying to get people thinking and talking and checking something out, but you don't have any budget at all. And that's been very useful for me, what I learned from the DIY scene in terms of making a living from doing marketing and communications and building websites and marketing strategies for people and so on.
Yeah, it's so funny. I really like that idea of just because of the budget aspect, where it's like so many people, and I'm sure you've experienced this, where, if you're booking travel for work or whatever, it's like, everybody always immediately in the corporate world goes to like, okay, here's the 5-star hotels or whatever. And, people like us are just like, I can pretty much stay wherever, because like as long as it has a bed and as long as it doesn't have like dog piss all over it, like it's better than what I've slept in the past.
Yeah, exactly. And when you've been touring and involved in various things, you've got friends, or at least a friend of a friend, in pretty much every city in the world. So when you have to go places like that, you'll be like, can I just keep the $500 for the hotel room and I'll stay on my friend's sofa? And
Totally.
And you can, a lot of the time, you can't say it to the client or the boss, but you can figure out a way to make it happen.
Of course. Yeah. And the last thing I wanted to hit on was the idea, and I am putting you on the spot here, where if you're talking about, just because I do think, I mean, I also am very, very devoid of Irish punk hardcore culture. If you were to, encourage myself and obviously the listeners of this show to kind of look at your own personal Mount Rushmore, to check out bands, from Ireland that exist in the scene, modern, old, whatever you want to do, who would you kind of push people towards?
Wow. Let me think. I mean, I guess I'll just mention some of my personal favorites.
Yeah.
There's one of the first 7-inches I got that was really important for me, was a band called Puget Sound. They did a couple of CDs afterwards, but their first 7-inch was, on a short-lived label, Rise Above Records. My mate Liamo, who played in a band called Sir Kill-A-Lot, did it. And it was a perfect mix of like 70s dub ska and very nasty punk. And they were very influenced by Strike 9 DC, who I mentioned earlier. And actually their album Ghetto Blast is another gem, which is completely overlooked. Amazing album. Very influenced by the Ruts. And they did, reggae ska punk in a very authentic way. Completely different to the American ska revival, which would have been going on soon after that. And those two bands were huge at the time. In terms of more modern era, Zom, I would highly recommend. That's members who also play in Disguise, and they played in Crowd Control. And otherwise, what stands out to me? Actually, a band called Jack Beast. Someone just made a website and put all their stuff up on it, including unreleased recordings. But Jack Beast were awesome. They were kind of, shellac influenced, I guess, angular hardcore, as people would have called it, even Quicksand and bands like that.
Okay.
They were awesome. And they were quite influential. Some of them, I think, went on, they either influenced or played in the Redneck Manifesto, who were very good. And I think one of them, or their brother, was in Cheapskate. Cheapskate were awesome as well. They've got a split 7-inch with Steaky. You might be able to find it online. But I guess in a similar way to Australia, Ireland had its very own self-contained scene where the bands influenced each other, and there were seldom bands from overseas, maybe from Scotland or England or Wales. But it was a big melting pot, and you could hear that in a lot of the bands from the time. Yeah.
Well, no, I appreciate that, because I do think you hit the nail on the head, where the bands, like, yes, there is outside influence in regards to, bands that exist in other places. But when you talk about the, hand-to-hand combat influence that happens when you just go to shows and you see bands, like, like you said, it's all self-contained. So I think because of that, so many people just don't pay attention to it because, it doesn't pop up on their radar or whatever.
Yeah. And actually, just because I'm looking at it, because it's on the record player now, I should mention this LP. It's by a band called For Those I Love. And that was this punk kid in Ireland who used to be involved in the hardcore scene. And he went on and made this incredible record that has more in common with the Streets or Mike Skinner or that kind of thing. But you can very much hear the DIY punk influence in it. And, it's all samples and kind of housey beats and so on. But it's punk music, essentially. And that's the real fun thing about these spirals of influence. You can never say exactly where they begin, and you can never say where they end, but they emanate this energy which touches things around it. And as you find out, like, what was I hearing the other day? The guy from Link 80, was making, what movie was it? I think he's making Marvel movies now. And like, it's just these crazy things where you go, what? Like, and you find out that punk is everywhere. It's in everything.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Especially because it's had such, everybody that has experienced or been influenced by it, you know, has had time to gestate and then grow up and be a professional human in whatever creative endeavor they're doing. Or even if it's not creative, but it's still, you know, they still apply those principles as we were talking about before. You never know where it's going to end up. And now that, you know, punk is arguably just as mainstream as everything else, like just that notion of like, oh yeah, you played in a terrible, you know, ska punk band or whatever, like no shots against Link 80, but you know, still, and you're involved in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's crazy.
It is. It's complete fiction. You know, you just go, what?
Totally.
And it's cool. Yeah. It's cool. I think it will get more and more, you know, as the mainstream commercial industry becomes more and more bereft of original ideas. Well, they're going to have to find people who will break the rules and do new, interesting things.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. Well, Cormy, I really appreciate you hanging out with me this morning your time, evening my time. And yeah, I appreciate you doing this, my friend.
Thanks so much, Ray. I really appreciate it being asked to be on your podcast and really enjoyed the conversation.
Oh, that was so great. Thank you very much, Cormy, for coming to hang out and educate me and just be a great hang and conversation. And like I said, if you have not listened to Geld, please correct that. I absolutely adore their record, and I think it's worthwhile of your time. Also, shout out to Bailey, publicist of The Stars. She is a great human being, and she brings me ideas for the show all the time, and I love her for that. So thank you, Bailey. Next week, I have, in my mind, and many other people's minds, an absolute legend in the game of punk and hardcore. I have Dan Yemin, who played in Lifetime, Kid Dynamite, Paint It Black, and he now currently plays in a band called Open City that is releasing a new record on Get Better Records on October 6th. It's so cool. But yeah, that's what we're going to be doing next week. And so Dan Yemin, oh my gosh, it was a real thoughtful conversation. Like there were times where I asked a question and he took like, you know, a good 10 seconds before he started to answer. And sometimes I'm not used to that. So I was like, wait, do I need to ask the question a different way? So that's the sort of human he is. He's very thoughtful and intelligent. So Dan Yemin on the show next week. And until then, please be safe, everybody.
Now is the time to flex your footprint. With T-Mobile for Business and the nation's largest 5G network, inspiration can strike from virtually anywhere. So whether you're in the office, on the road, or on your PT, not quite you'll be ready for the next big thing. After all, if geography doesn't limit your business, your network shouldn't either. Learn more at T-Mobile.com/now.
At Bank of America, we learn what matters most by asking our customers one simple question. What would you like the power to do?
I'd like the power to worry less.
The power to make my parents comfortable.
The power to...
agree on a monthly budget?
Oh, well, hey, that'd be nice.
No matter what your financial goal is, we're here to help. Bank of America, what would you like the power to do? Bank of America N.A., member FDIC, equal credit opportunity lender.
Has all of that summer travel taken a toll on your sleep? Leave those out-of-town beds and sleeping bags behind this Labor Day weekend and come home to the cool, comfy sleep you deserve with Leesa. Leesa's hybrid mattresses are designed to beat the heat so you can look forward to having a relaxing and peaceful night's sleep every night. For a limited time, save up to $700 off select mattresses, plus 2 free pillows during Leesa's Labor Day sale. Use the code iHeart and receive an additional $50 off mattresses and select goods. That's code iHeart. Make a positive impact with your Labor Day purchase. Leesa donates 1 new mattress for every 10 sold. For a limited time, save up to $700 off select mattresses, plus 2 free pillows during Leesa's Labor Day sale. And use code iHeart for an additional $50 off mattresses and select goods. Go to Leesa.com today. That's Leesa.com. Exclusions apply. See Leesa.com.